Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. I know there's still a lot of excitement from that prior panel, but let's go ahead and get started here. We have the Arizona AAM Stakeholders Panel, and the best part about being the last session of the day is everybody in the seats right now wants to be here. There's no other session after this, unless you're all holding out for happy hour, in which case we'll try to stick to time. As Mike said, I'm Taylor Alberstadt. I lead our accounts and sales at Honeywell's Advanced Air Mobility Group. We're based here in Phoenix, and I'm very fortunate to be introducing an esteemed panel of incredible thinkers. So I'll go down the line here from your all's left to right. Angela Aspito is the Managing Director for the Southwest Mission Acceleration Center and the Defense Innovation Unit On-Ramp Hub. The Southwest MAC is a full-service consulting firm specializing in support services for defense first and dual-use technology developers. With a decade of experience leading non-traditional organizations, Angela is an expert in the development and delivery of scalable solutions for defense contractors. She's proud to be described as disruptive and wakes up every morning ready to launch grenades at the status quo. That's true. Her words, not mine. That's shots fired to our panelists and the audience here. Get ready for some spicy takes from Angela. And that reminds me, as you've seen with all the other panels, audience, please prepare your questions. We'll go through 30, 40 minutes, and then I'm happy to open it up. So tough questions for the audience. Let's get those going. Next, we have Sarah Demory. She is the Assistant Aviation Director and Chief Operating Officer of the City of Phoenix Aviation Department, which includes Sky Harbor, Deer Valley, and Goodyear airports, having previously worked at Minneapolis-St. Paul, Omaha-Eppley, SeaTac, and Boise airports. In her role as COO, Sarah leads the aviation facilities and services, operations, public safety and security divisions, aviation fire, and police operations. Sarah is an accredited airport executive with the American Association of Airport Executives and has a commercial pilot's license with instrument and multi-engine rating. So I'm volunteering Captain Demory for anybody who wants to go flying after this panel.
Let's go.
Next, we have Professor Tony Waas. He's the director of the School of Engineering for Matter, Transport, and Energy, which houses aerospace, mechanical, materials, bio, and chemical engineering programs at Arizona State University. Professor Waas is a fellow of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, AIAA, the American Society of Mechanical Engineering, American Society for Composites, American Academy of Mechanics, and Royal Aeronautical Society, UK. Throughout his distinguished career at ASU, the University of Washington, and the University of Michigan, Professor Waas has been the recipient of many awards and accolades, and his current research interests include robotically manufactured lightweight structures, computational modeling of composite aerostructures, 3D printed lightweight structures, hydrogen storage for mobility, and data science applications and modeling of materials and structures, among other just as exciting topics. If anyone is interested in intellectually rattling sabers after the panel, Professor Waas is your man. Last and certainly not least is Marisa Paula Walker. Marisa is with the Arizona Commerce Authority, the state's economic development organization. She serves as the Executive Vice President for Infrastructure and is also Executive Director of the Institute of Advanced Mobility, a public-private consortium focused on safety, science, and policy for next-gen transportation. Her portfolio includes leading the U.S. DOT SMART grant on connected vehicles, serving as the administrator for the forthcoming Arizona Space Commission, and overseeing the state's strategy for advanced air mobility. Marisa and I will be battling to see who will be the first Arizona resident to fly on an AAM vehicle.
Bring it.
With that being said, to set the stage, a lot is going on globally related to advanced air mobility. Over $10 billion have been invested in OEMs that seek to fulfill a variety of missions, from drones for commercial and military use that can complete the dull, dirty, and dangerous missions, to last-mile parcel delivery, to middle-mile logistics, and to the soon-to-be reality of moving people between places in a way that promises to be more efficient, cheaper, quieter, safer, and more sustainable than existing modalities. There's already a lot of progress and advancement happening in AAM ecosystem that we've heard about over the past 36 hours from this stage and across the hall. This includes tech maturation, manufacturing, testing, infrastructure, regulation, and initial rollout for early use cases. But much of what you've heard about isn't happening globally. It's not in our backyard here in Arizona. Why is that? What is happening here? And what are we doing to influence material, positive change, the way people will live in the future? So with that, we'll start with the panel, starting with Sarah maybe, and then opening it up to Angela and Marisa. While technology is often developed globally, AAM impacts are felt at the local level. Arizona has proven capable in being a leader in innovation. Tell the audience a bit about what you're working on in this space and what's happening here in Arizona.
Sure, that's a great question, and this is a rock star panel. I think that the one thing that sets Arizona apart from what's happening globally and arguably what's happening around the U.S. is the spirit of collaboration that happens not only here in Phoenix, but around the state. We are, at least from the airport's perspective, and I think I give the panel a unique perspective and can talk about what we're doing from the airport's perspective within the city. We are connected in ways, and we are very innovative focused. As you heard from our Mayor Gallego yesterday in her opening remarks, there is nothing that we can't do. And we are a very innovative, tech-driven city, and we're very open to working together collaboratively to make things happen. Knowing that and sort of setting the stage, at least for the City of Phoenix Aviation, there's so many more unknowns that we don't know yet. And so I think we're working internally to just try to really understand what AAM will bring to the airport system at not only Sky Harbor. Is there a commercial component? Likely, will this be an Uber elevator? Will this be a ground air transportation element? Maybe. Or will it be flight training at our general aviation airports? Possibly. And so we, within the City of Phoenix, a number of years ago, really wanted to understand what this possibly could be for our airport system. And so we worked with a consultant, and we started a study. Because there's a saying in the aviation world, and if you've seen one airport, you've only seen one airport, and that's so true, not only for Sky Harbor, but for our airport system. Our two general aviation airports, Phoenix Deer Valley and Phoenix Goodyear airports, couldn't be more different from each other. They serve a different community. The North Valley and the West Valley, which are growing so rapidly, our airports are expanding, which is great, but we need to make sure that we're, as an airport system, prepared and have had the foresight to prepare for that need. And so that's really what the study helped us with. We brought, as a part of the study, more questions than answers, as I mentioned, but it's really piqued our interest, and from that, additional studies have come. And so where we are right now is we need to really understand from a utility standpoint, working with our utility, with APS, for our airport system, what can we accommodate today? What is our growing need? And then what is the even more emerging need with AAM? And so that's where we are today. But I would say that we are very innovative focused, and we're very, very open, and we're excited about what the future is going to bring.
That's great. Obviously, airports play the ultimate local role, and advanced air mobility will be coupled very tightly to what happens at airports. Angela and Marisa, you want to take a stab? What are you working on here in Arizona?
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. Appreciate the introduction. That was quite crafty there. And thanks for everyone for sticking around. This is actually what I think is a pretty exciting topic when we start to drive it, not just around the technical aspects, but really talk about some of the practical applications on the ground associated with it. It might not always be recognized, but Arizona has actually been a testing location, particularly for OEMs and aerospace, for decades. In fact, we have multiple testing proving grounds all around the state. Waymo uses our roadway as a living laboratory associated with it. There's a lot of things that drive that. We're well aware of that advantage that we have. We've got a really strong team within the Arizona Commerce Authority, that our business development team, that's been in discussions with many of the companies that were featured over the last 2 days. And thanks again to Mike and Angelo and VFS for putting together this really insightful conversation. Because we believe in some way the old adage, where they test, they invest. And so we're looking at this from an economic development perspective. Some of you are probably aware that the FAA during the reauthorization included some language. We'll see there's a lot of discussions that are going on right now around federal priorities, but at least captured in that language, in that legislation, was a determination, a mandate to establish a Center for Aviation, Advanced Aviation Technologies by September 2026. We feel that that's a great way, as many of our colleagues in other states as well are thinking, a great way to mobilize this ecosystem that we have existing in our state. And so a lot of the attention that I'm putting into work right now focuses around identifying the experts in our ecosystem, the facilities like airports and otherwise. And then a critical component is those testing corridors that we're going to need to establish in order to really make this not just kind of a localized testing. We've got some really great opportunities around that, but getting from a more distant perspective from a point A to point B within our state, I think is going to be critical.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm just curious, if I could, for a second. How many of you in the audience are on the industry side, developing technology? Okay. And how many of you are on the academic side, doing research? Okay. And how many of you are neither of those two things? Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Great. Thanks. Okay. I like to ask, right? Because I want to know. So to just build on this point of testing and training, right? Everything that I think about is defense related in the name of national security, right? And for those of you following the news, right, we have an adversary, a couple thousand miles away in the Pacific who is interested in potentially starting a conflict with some of our allies. And so as we think about how we might defend our country or improve our national security posture in the next 5 years, this idea of advanced air mobility is extremely critical because we're talking about having to defend thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres across multiple islands that are completely disparate, right? And so we cannot maneuver, we cannot figure out how to protect ourselves and our allies from our adversaries without the capability of advanced air mobility, right? So everything you guys are doing is extremely critical. So critical, in fact, that recently the Secretary of the Army just announced that Arizona will be the gateway to the Pacific from the perspective of testing and training. And so we have a couple of fantastic and well-equipped and well-manned, actually, interestingly enough, facilities around the state of Arizona. We have Fort Huachuca, which does all of our testing and training for multi-domain operations. If that's an unfamiliar word, let me know later. I'll tell you all about it. We also have Marine Corps Air Station Yuma, which tests all of the Marine Corps and the Navy's advanced air mobility platforms and tools. And then we have weapons testing right down at Yuma Proving Ground, so the things that go boom. So we've got the ability to test beeps and squeaks, the ability to test things that fly, and the ability to test things that blow up, which is a pretty fantastic trifecta, right? When you're talking about being a place that people want to come test and train. And I would argue, for those of you in the room that are working on the industry side, why wouldn't you want to build all those things here in Arizona, in proximity to your end user, in proximity to your testing and training facilities?
That's great. And in a similar vein, Professor Waas, tell us about what you see happening at Arizona State University that is a key enabler for advanced air mobility and how that technology is shaping aviation differently than in the past.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor, for inviting me. So at ASU, there is a lot going on in this space, particularly in our school, which has both, all three, aerospace, mechanical, and materials. All three of those disciplines contribute heavily to advanced air mobility. So just to give you an idea of types of research we're looking at, we are looking at scalability, enabling the safe and effective scaling of AAM systems to support large numbers of UAS, reliability, facilitating reliable autonomous operations, sustainability, finding different sources for propulsion. You heard about hydrogen as a fuel, there's batteries, There are other technologies that are being considered and researched. Better human interactions, improving interfaces for human supervision and interaction with multiple UAS. Then we have I would say for a university, we have the best drone testing facility. It is a very large space with 105 cameras, 25-foot high ceilings that can look at position control of advanced air mobility vehicles, but also swarms of them for various applications that are of interest to the Army is in particular and the Air Force. Then of course collaboration, right? So there's opportunity for people in the audience and others to collaborate with researchers working in this space at ASU. So there's a lot happening at ASU, and I think it'll only increase as time progresses.
Go Devils. Marisa, you've been tracking advancements in this space for the better part of a decade, and we heard yesterday from Mayor Gallego. We know there's support from Governor Hobbs. Scottsdale has launched Drone as a First Responder. We know in 2022 there was the committee study done. What have you seen change in the past several years, relative to how public and private are partnering and kind of the momentum that feels like it's here?
Yeah, I think what was exciting, because some of you are probably aware when NASA and FAA kicked off at that time called the Urban Air Mobility Grand Challenge in 2018, I believe, subsequently renamed to Advanced Air Mobility, which I think was a great move because that's obviously the issue around connecting a broader footprint of communities and providing hopefully service is going to be really critical. I think that it's just been a really interesting trajectory that coinciding with that time, not only the elevation of not just Waymo, but others that were bringing that kind of technology into our state, and particularly in this region, was also just an embrace around UAS. I mean, I can remember a time when drone was a bad word, and then all of a sudden you started to see really interesting use cases. It's pretty embraced, particularly by our transportation entities, around everything from being able to communicate project development and advancement through their communication division, survey work, bridge work, different things like that. And I think a lot of people have begun to embrace that, not to mention that you can go to different retail stores and actually purchase that. So I think there's a real interest. Now, what I'm not totally clear about is just where folks are around carrying humans. I assume that that's going to take a little bit greater risk and tolerance associated with it. We definitely saw in the automated vehicle space that once people got to have that tactile feel, the experience of it, their comfort level associated with the technology increased. I think one of the most encouraging things for us in Arizona, because we know often the top leads us, and you kind of alluded to it already with both our mayor and our governor getting out there, but our broader policymakers have embraced this as well too. There's actually some model language that's working its way through our legislature right now that would be we have a great environment, a great regulatory environment for innovation. There's no doubt about it. But obviously, as the maturation in this industry continues, there's a need to kind of really fine-tune rules and responsibilities and access going forward. So I think there's just a lot of excitement and embracing it. When the governor made the announcement, we had lots of feedback from both the public entities as well as the media, and that always lays an important foundation for us to kind of begin the broader integration of this kind of technology into the communities.
That's great. On the regulatory front, we talked amongst the panel last week. SB 1307 was released, and those of us in the industry usually are pretty close to what's happening, and it kind of caught us by surprise. And within Honeywell, so there's momentum at the regulatory level that doesn't always have to be pushed from industry, and it's great to be able to see that. For the rest of the panel along the same lines, what do you see as major recent or upcoming inflection points? And how can we in Arizona as a community how can we ensure that those come to bear?
Well, I can talk about, it's a great question, but I can talk about a little bit about what Waymo did for the airport. So if I could, again, interactive, I would love to hear from the audience, but how many of you visiting Phoenix have had the opportunity yet to take a Waymo All right. For those that haven't, I encourage you to, this is a free, I guess, commercial for Waymo, but it is an experience. It's a great way to get back to the airport. A little shameless plug, but we are also the only airport in the United States or in the world where you can take a Waymo vehicle or an autonomous vehicle to the airport. We're really proud of that. I think it speaks to the spirit of innovation and not only wanting to, obviously innovate and lead, but lean into that innovation. If you'd asked me a few years ago if I would get into an autonomous vehicle, I took a pause and I was like, this is an interesting concept. I need to think about that. And you really do need to, I think, experience it to really believe it. And get that sort of sense of comfort. What we did with Waymo in partnership was a true collaboration between the city, the airport, and Waymo, and we really took a crawl, walk, run approach. And I would say that I think is a great. Has been a great testing ground, and I think it sets the stage for future innovations of perhaps our success, because we didn't jump into it. We wanted to really understand and learn together. You all have been to our airport, extremely busy airport, 5 miles from the city center, we're a very small footprint, 3,500 acres, surrounded by a river and a couple of freeway systems. It's very, from a technology standpoint and from a roadway standpoint, very challenging and even as a driver, it can be kind of intimidating. And so we really worked very closely. I don't know and would never try to tell you that I'm an engineer or understand the technology, but we worked together to understand how the vehicle would maneuver, and it really took a crawl, walk, run. We did so actually when we were doing some construction at our 24th Street SkyTrain station, so it actually worked out beautifully because we had a great testing ground in which we could do that. And the airport employees, law enforcement, our first responders, our firefighters had an opportunity to really interact with the vehicle and understand how it worked and build that trust. And then, of course, we expanded it. We first launched it at our SkyTrain stations at one and then the other, which is kind of end-to-end bookends for the airport for ground transportation, and then Terminal 3 and then Terminal 4. And now you're able to hail a Waymo and we go anywhere throughout the airport roadway system. I think we can learn that, with AAM, we want to take that same approach. We want to learn, I've learned just in the last couple of days that I think when you've seen one eVTOL, you've only seen one eVTOL, all of the OEMs are a little different. And so I think it's taking that time to really understand and build that collaboration and that mutual trust and understanding, and have a common goal, and work together on that common goal. And then in that, you'll build your community trust as well. I think we can really learn a lot by what we've done in Phoenix. We look forward actually to being one of the first, whether that's at Sky Harbor, Deer Valley, Goodyear, for flight training, for ground transportation, for elevating us to take us to the mountains. I can't wait, but I know we have a lot of work a lot of runway ahead of us, maybe a lot ahead of us. Yeah. But I think if we work collaboratively and within the state, we have that spirit of collaboration that we're really excited about. We can work together and we can make it happen.
Yeah, Taylor, can I just put a finer point on that? One of the unique things that we don't publicize enough about the Waymo introduction to the community that happened particularly with Chandler and with Phoenix was, and I saw an interesting presentation, I think, by the gentleman from Pivotal yesterday, where he had a first responder in their glider, their flyer, I think that's what they called it. And they, flew it to the location and saved seconds comparatively to an ambulance showing up. We had similar engagement with our first responder community, not only getting them to, go and see the demonstration, ride in the vehicles, but even equally important, having the engineers that are working on the AV actually ride in the vehicles, the fire vehicles, the police vehicles, so they understand what it means when minutes matter, when you're in a scenario, and your system needs to have some sense of clarity and transparency for them when they're in their zone, in their operation. And I think those are models that we often don't think about until we're already at the point that we want to have these discussions with communities, and it should be part of a longer strategy of planning before you even get to the front door.
Okay, from a consumer perspective, this is very rare for me. I usually take a Department of Defense perspective, but I'm a consumer. It costs me $1,500 a month to pay for my new car, and I still have to drive it. Okay? Like, make me an air taxi, right? Bring me, I would pay more than $1,500 a month to get that productive time back, right? And I am not by any stretch of the imagination an early adopter. So if I'm standing here saying this, right, I'm telling you that like the general consumer population is ready, right? So I think what we need to do is align our local, state, and federal policymakers to the orientation of the consumer, right? If we're ready as consumers, then there's a huge opportunity on the plate for our lawmakers. Yeah.
I think that's great, right? And another plug for Waymo. It's an app on your phone. You can download it right now to pick you up outside the convention center, take you to the airport. And I think, as we heard from the folks on the panel and Sarah, this is a great example of how you lay the foundation for new technology. And Phoenix is proving to adapt really well to that type of tech.
So next year for this conference, are we going to go to the roof and hail an air taxi from the top of the convention center? Like, that sounds pretty awesome.
Any OEMs in the audience want to commit to
Who
being
wants
able
to
to
help
do
me
that?
make that happen, right?
You can use Honeywell technology.
Can I add a
Please.
point? In aviation, safety is number one, right? Public acceptance only occurs if you can establish that your new vehicle, new mode is safe. So without realizing, that's what Waymo is doing. They're establishing their safety record so that slowly but steadily but surely public acceptance will occur, right? So in a similar vein, I think for advanced air mobility to get traction, I believe that we should have a remote area in Arizona where we can do trials of perhaps carrying cargo and do several trial runs between two locations autonomously. Now, let me tell you, people who study and do research in autonomy will tell you it's a lot difficult to have an autonomous system for a ground vehicle than for an airplane. As way back as, I'd say 18 years before Delta took over Northwest Airlines, Northwest did an experiment with very little public knowledge. They were landing airplanes at Tokyo Narita Airport, which is a very difficult place to land, surrounded by water. You can't miss the point where you hit the runway. And they did an entire year's worth of landings in fog, in all kinds of difficult conditions. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the technology for autonomous air vehicles is a lot easier than what Waymo is doing. So Waymo's success shows that the technology is ready, but what's not ready is the regulatory authorities and the acceptance. Because there's always this idea that one air vehicle accident is a lot bigger than one car accident, yet 35,000 people perish on the highways, right? So I think carrying cargo safely from point A to point B autonomously will establish a level of confidence that will make, I think Arizona is ready to become, in my opinion, there's North Carolina, Florida, and Arizona right now doing a lot in this space. Now I think Arizona can become the number one state, the first state to get to passenger carrying AAM vehicles. I think it could be possible because I think the regulatory authorities here move much faster than elsewhere. So that's just my opinion on this.
Well, and on that note too, the mayor mentioned yesterday that the work that Amazon has been doing with package delivery via drone out in the West Valley. We've been watching that very, very closely and wanting to learn from them also some of their lessons learned and look forward to having those conversations. They're on a pause right now, I think, because of safety that's happening and not even in Arizona, but they've taken a pause system-wide. But, that is transformative to your point. I mean, essentially, we can just go further from there. And there were a lot of concerns when that concept came up to us. We had an opportunity to comment, and we were concerned and wanted to know how the airspace was going to work. How high is it going to be flying? Where is it going to be flying? That touches for those not familiar, the airspace out at our Goodyear Airport, which is a very, very busy single runway flight training airport. We wanted to make sure that we worked in collaboration and understood what potential impacts there could be, and to see that they've had some successes is really encouraging.
So maybe shifting gears a little bit, thinking specifically about the defense side, Angela, how has the way of doing business changed where Arizona is now positioned to take advantage of that change, within your organization and helping companies achieve their ends?
Wow. Yeah, good question. So, I'm not going to repeat myself, in regards to Arizona being a testing and training playground, right? Like, let's leave that in column A. I think that's a huge opportunity for companies. For 2 years, I've been standing on the top of the U.S. Bank Tower, like throwing up the bat signal to anybody who wants to pay attention, like that Arizona is the place where you can come and build really cool stuff and the Department of Defense will want to use it, right? And people are paying attention, right? I think it's about 2 years. So I've done all the hard work for all of you in the room already, right? You can just show up and start making amazing things, and we'll get it to the DoD. But in all seriousness, right, we have a mandate to figure out how to expand the industrial base that supports these capabilities, 1. 2, we have $42 billion, with a B, billion dollars in research, development, and engineering funds. Right? And 3, we have a desperate need to advance technology and outpace our adversaries, right? So we're now on probably about a 2-year timeline, right? Before we have to have more advanced capabilities than anybody else out there. That tends to be the biggest of the 3, right? The demand signal, right? The capability. We have world-class research institutions. You can find talent. You can find research right here. You don't have to go anywhere. So the potential for economic impact is massive in Arizona as it relates to aerospace and defense, manufacturing, testing, training, right? I think we're finally starting to see the biggest change of all those things, right? Is we're finally starting to see folks near the Pentagon paying attention to. So to me, that's going to be a huge shift, right? This alignment of policy, budget, and time.
So we're ready.
We're ready. We're so ready. Well, I've been ready for 2 years, as I mentioned, but everyone else is finally getting ready.
Not to mention great weather. I mean,
All this-
we've seen cold weather testing. Let's see what it does in the heat as well. Do some of that.
I think it was confirmed yesterday, this is the weather year-round.
It is. Oh, it is. I'm sorry. It is.
Yeah, think about it, right? Like, if you need to train in the desert, you can come here. If you need to train in the Arctic, you can come here for 3 weeks in January. Like, that's what it feels like when you're in Arizona at night.
True. Good point. Good point.
So get your questions ready. So I'll open it up for audience questions after this next one. So feel free to go up to one of the mics here, or we can maybe run one to you. So Professor Waas, you've been part of multiple technical communities across the United States. From Arizona now, Michigan, Washington State. What are some of the similarities and differences, and why did you end up choosing ASU relative to technology?
Great question. The answer to that, I can tell you right off the bat, I'll be lying if I said weather doesn't play a role. So that was an important consideration. But no, seriously, the way ASU is organized is what attracted me here. because of the interconnections and ability to work across the siloed department structure that you find in many universities. Here in one school, we are still a part of the Fulton School of Engineering, but within one school, you have aeromechanical materials, which is clearly a very important asset for advanced air mobility development. And then, of course, you have chemical and bio design, which does not play as an important role as the other three. Having said that, Washington, I saw a lot of activity in Washington because of the ecosystem in Seattle. But again, when I was there was a student group wanting to do trials across Lake Washington. The campus is right on the shoreline of Lake Washington, and we wanted to fly right across to where Microsoft is. We advanced that idea quite a bit, and Boeing was helping us to do this, but we were stuck with the regulatory authorities not allowing that. And the idea of choosing over water was for safety reasons. And as long as we timed it so that it won't interfere with boats, ships, small ships, transporting goods on the lake, but we decided to look at time windows where that would not happen. Yet we could not get FAA authority to agree on regulations. So that brings me to a next, I think, a very important asset we will need. Already the air traffic space is crowded, right? And AAMs will fly at a different ceiling, perhaps at a much lower level. And I think we really need a UAS traffic management system. If that is not in place, it will be very difficult for me to conceive how a autonomous system can be successful. We will need a UAS space and a traffic management system, and that's been on the cards for a long time. The National Academy of Engineering, I'm on one of the committees there, they've been pushing this, but it's not moving as fast as I would like. So that's another point I like to make.
Thank you. Any questions in the audience? Otherwise, I can keep going.
Thank you very much. And I guess for the last panel of the day, you've had an opportunity to listen to everyone. But with regard to control, I was at the Palo Alto eVTOL show, and the FAA was very clear they would not get involved in traffic control for AAM. That was a big no, and they're leaving it up to third parties. You being a state that is obviously wanting to embrace this technology, what do you see doing there? Because obviously you know it's going to be a big factor in getting these off the ground and actually operating at the volumes that these visionaries think. Thanks.
I'm not necessarily the technical person up here. The state has been exploring. There were some models of engagement with Switzerland, actually, that was looking to create a system. One of the challenges that we ran into in Arizona is that you had to be married to each one of the systems, and there's just not, if I'm expressing myself correctly, in order to create some measure so that we had visibility across the state about where these vehicles were, and almost try to create an environment around traffic integration broadly, moving the market and people all towards that system and the investments. It was really early. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago that we looked at, but it's probably well worth looking at it again. But I think one of the cautions always with this from a state perspective is, AAM is not going to succeed just in Arizona, right? I mean, it's got to be integrated more broadly across state jurisdictions. And so I think what's really needed is some broader effort. And I know that there's some of this dialogue, both at this event as well as AUVSI and several others that I'm probably overlooking, in which people are trying to have this conversation. But I think that's the challenge that I've seen from my perspective. But my colleagues might have more articulate descriptions of the challenges.
I think that's well said. I think there's still a lot to be determined. I didn't attend that, and so I can't speak to it exactly, but I can tell you in Arizona, we have a phenomenal FAA team, and who I think are open to the conversation. There's still a lot yet to be determined, and a lot of that's going to come from their counterparts in Washington, D.C., at the Airports Division, at Air Traffic Organization. They have now stood up an AAM team, and I think there's going to be a lot more advancements, hopefully, to follow. But I can tell you locally, they're open to having the conversation. It's not on the AAM front, but I will tell you just a little case study that we had even at Sky Harbor. Every 3 years, we have a full-scale emergency exercise. Every airport that's a 139 certificated airport has to do this. We held ours a couple of years ago, but we held it at night. We'd never held our exercise at night. And our firefighters and our first responders really wanted to see what the landscape looked like at night, because just like driving is different at night, the airport looks so much different at night. There's lights. And it was a great success, but they also said, we want to launch a drone. Our police and fire teams have a UAS program. They wanted to launch a drone to be able to really, they used it as part of the exercise just to see how it could be used to help us at the airport for an exercise. They've used it out in the field as they've responded to accidents and things like that. We obviously had to work with the FAA and ask that question, and it was a unanimous absolutely. And by the way, let's learn together on how you use it. What did you learn? How could we be using it to help us advance our programs? And so now we're having internal conversations about, could we have our own internal UAS program for fence line inspections, for river bottom inspections, for roof line? Our facilities and services team could use it for just getting eyes on parts of the facility that they don't normally have the opportunity to see. So I just, again, it's a testament to the spirit, I think, of there's not only nothing that we can't do in Arizona. We work together, and we have that common understanding and mutual respect. And there's no such thing as a silly question. Let's figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think you find a lot of environments where you get no's, and here, let's find a way to get to yes, right?
You bet.
Other audience questions? Okay, next one for everyone. We can go down the line. Based on where each of you sit, your relative areas of expertise, what aren't we as an AAM community thinking about as much as we should, or where do we need to focus our efforts, either locally or more broadly?
Go for it.
All right. Well, I mentioned it before. Our team is really wanting to understand the utility draw and the needs. And I am also the immediate past president for the Arizona Airports Association. And as I'm talking to members within airports around the state of Arizona, smaller communities in particular, are having a hard time maintaining their own airport infrastructure. And then the thought of, in some cases, it's kind of a daunting thought of well, what is my electrical utility need going to be if we do advanced AM forward, and we can bridge those communities together. What do the small airports and what do my airports need to do to prepare from a utility standpoint, or do they? I think they do, but that is still a looming question, and something that we're encouraging other airports to kind of try to work with their own utilities to really find out. And so for us, within the city of Phoenix, our master plan and that utility study is really going to help, and then working collaboratively with our utility provider to make sure we're forward thinking and making sure we have the infrastructure to be prepared.
Yeah. I would say, I think, I really want to see us leaning into leveraging the tyranny of distance in Arizona. We have so much space, guys. There's so much space, right? Use it. It is, by the way, the drone lab at ASU is fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
huge shout out. It is fantastic. If you want to figure out how something operates in an environment that you can control, right? You're inside, there's a roof over your head, you've got, 3,500 square feet. Or 5,500.
That's correct.
Yep. But that's not how the real world works, right? And Arizona just has this big, beautiful space available for you to test in every condition. And I really want to see us leaning into that and figuring out how to work together to leverage that so that you can go from Flagstaff to Marana and you can test and train on everything.
Another topic I think we don't have to necessarily focus, but we need to think about policy, regulation, and liability issues. And there is some studies going on at the law school at ASU. Gary Merchant, he's an expert in this area, and he used to be a member of the Urban Air Mobility Study Committee for Arizona in 2022. So I think that's an aspect that is going to come up if we have passenger transport. That will have to be worked out with insurance companies, etc. So that's not an easy solution there, but it's a needed solution if we are going to be successful, right?
Taylor, I concur with all my colleagues. This is the hard part when you're on a great team here. They've covered a lot of things. I think, and maybe it's not totally appropriately reflected when we did the raising of hands, but it gets back to your earlier question about sustaining, because we've articulated here quite a bit about this can-do mentality, the ability when an issue comes up, jump in there. That is fantastic, and that gets you to another level. But we also need to take a more sustained approach to this so that it doesn't feel so episodic. And one of the things that we found really helpful, and apologies if this lingers on a little bit too long, but in our effort to provide guidance to the state around the adoption of automated vehicles, we built this Institute of Advanced Mobility now that we're talking about it. And the state did a match-for-match dollar with the private sector, which meant that teams were coming together. And this is analogous to, I think, what Honeywell's doing specifically with ASU, but we did it with all 3 universities, our public universities. We had them assembled based on their core competencies and interests, where they could, in conjunction, let's say, with State Farm or Intel at the time that had Mobileye and others, to put together a body of research agenda items that could be advanced collaboratively. And it was a great process because when people are putting skin in the game, dollar for dollar, the best ideas rise to the top, right? And you really understand what your competencies are. The other additional benefits that I hadn't even truly appreciated in that process, because it was a lot of sausage grinding. I won't go into the details about the terminology debates that we had around some of the metrics in evaluating the performance of automated vehicles. But what came out of that was the development of just a robust ecosystem of people that built trust among each other to do bigger and better projects together to advance this. We also had situations with our DOTs, who are a very sophisticated group, and many of them have a lot of interest around innovation. Being at the table with the technologists to really understand some of the sensor suite that drive those vehicles. So LiDAR, what are the capability of LiDAR relative to radar? What's the value proposition of using solely cameras, which some OEMs, or not OEMs, some technologists have leaned heavily into that, versus others who feel that they need to have a sensor suite. And then an additional benefit of them being able to understand and learn more about that technology was the ability to do what state or government entities can do, which is leverage the thing they own, which is their infrastructure, in which we created test beds, in which we allowed emerging tech companies to come in, LiDAR companies. I saw Ouster was a support. We worked with Ouster several years ago. They were one of our first initial partners when they were first coming out. Their whole product line was directed towards being part of the vehicle system. Now they've got the potential for a different market opportunity around how could we apply that to the infrastructure and to be able to test to see, does this give us better situational awareness around some of the safety goals that the professor raised, which, too high a number. I think it's actually 42,000 that perish on our roadways, 1 million if you look globally, that are dying behind the wheel of a car. So anyway, just kind of a little bit of insight of where that true collaboration, which can be messy on the front end, but can be really beneficial and rewarding for regions and states and communities in building that capacity going forward.
That's great, thank you. So, you're hearing from the experts, where's gap in industry and business? Utility, using our space, liability, long-term vision, help to fill those gaps. Question from the audience.
With the city of Phoenix and with the state of Arizona, has there been a discussion with vertiports outside of existing airports? Is that part of the master plan or even an idea right now?
I think we're open to everything. Yeah, I think that is the question. I think that's the $1 million question. But I think airports will feel it first, and we'll connect airports because that's what we already are doing. But then what comes next, and how do we connect our communities? But I think we're open to that.
Yeah, I'd describe it as a little nascent at that point because the infrastructure associated with that is largely being driven by the private sector. And so there's got to be that push and pull of demand. And so I think we've been trying to educate ourselves around what are those core characteristics of vertiport versus just using a helipad or the existing airport to see, when we start to really begin, and it'll be interesting when you start to see some of this testing that's proposed in New York and other places where there's higher concentration, and then you're building that into, different locations, kind of like transit stations, as opposed to just landing on buildings or parking lots.
There are discussions going on the private sector side that I'm aware of, 2 different ones about projects in the state of Arizona, not unfortunately in the Phoenix proper at this point, but in Arizona about vertiports. So.
And when you think about, Marisa, like you said, New York versus Arizona, we are set up much better, right, to allow vertiport construction. You don't have to go on top of a building. You don't have to tear down a building. There's space here that doesn't exist in a lot of major metropolitan areas.
Yeah, I totally concur with that. I guess I assume that some of the deduction, listening to the gentleman, Tom from Archer yesterday, in his community decision, certainly there's a dollar value point that's motivating why you're going to particular markets, that there's a expendable, availability of wealth there that could help to subsidize some of that. I also wonder if the fact that the FAA has one of its designated UAS test sites in the kind of the broader region of New York and New Jersey is also kind of driving some of those decisions because they can leverage some of those existing resources as well. But Arizona, I think, is certainly going to be a second-tier market on being able to advance it.
I appreciate the comments on the public acceptance aspect of advanced air mobility. I would like to know, what conversations do you guys think need to happen in order to move this forward in a more positive way when it comes to that community acceptance aspect? But more specifically, in regards to the concern on the privacy that many will or may continue to think about, the privacy aspect of it.
I'm terrible at this. I signed my life away when I became a defense contractor, so privacy isn't a thing I know anything about. But please, somebody else, I'm sure.
Well, I can just, again, liken it back to what we learned from Waymo. So there were similar concerns about Waymo and, is the vehicle taking pictures or, and I think it's just that, showcasing and building that trust and showcasing what the vehicle can do and does do and showcasing that that's not taking photos inside your kitchen window and things like that. I think it's and then user adoption. I think once you've been in it and you've seen it and you can experience it, I think that will help as well. So it's just continued engagement with our communities about what this is. There's still so many that don't understand. I was even having conversations with my own family about this conference and about what it is that the industry is doing, and there was a lot of questions. And so I think it's just informing our communities about what's next and what the innovation can do, and then getting that I think that excitement about the idea of that this is not something that this is something that's attainable. That, just like you can get into a Waymo no different than you can hail an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi, someday you could fly up to the mountains and be there in minutes versus being on the freeway system. So I think just getting that community involvement and acceptance and educating the community, furthering that and advancing that is only going to help.
There's a famous quote, and it goes like this. If you are worried about and dislike fear, you're going to dislike irrelevance even less, right? And I think that that's really appropriate for the time and space.
That's great. And a call to action for the audience here. It was about 3 years ago in July, we hosted an event in Washington, D.C., and Congressman Graves said, there's a communication void in the public, right? All of us here, we're on the same page, right? We're trying to get to the same end. But I don't think we're talking enough outside of our bubble. So I'd encourage everybody here, talk to the people that don't know what AAM stands for, right? Talk to folks who need to be educated because, the right to play, as Professor Waas said, is safety, right? We need to ensure that folks don't believe these are going to be falling out of the sky. They're going to be certified vehicles, right? And all of you are experts relative to the public at large. So we need to fill that communication void so folks aren't coming up with their own ideas of what this is going to look like.
Taylor, I know we are out of time, but there's another topic that I wanted to mention, perhaps at another conference, but noise pollution is another very important acceptance hurdle that we have to clear. I know OEMs are working hard at new propeller designs and positioning the propellers to make it quiet. If you have too many of them and making too much noise, then people get turned off, right? And they get very upset. So that's another challenge we have to overcome.
Yeah. And Mike promised we could go a couple minutes over. So was there one more question in the audience? We'll make sure this is an easy one, right?
Yeah, I'll try to make this easy. As an engineer that works in the qualification and certification space, the whole reason why we're working to try to develop basically standards is because these become legal standards of care that define normal risk for a type of operation. What you see in other countries like China and the Emiratis and other areas is that for some of these experimental areas, they lean forward essentially with legislation that allows and accepts a kind of an experimental type situation. Have you, as part of your experience with Waymo and others, do you have some experience that perhaps could inform our industry in ways to reach out to legislators to try to do similar things?
Early and often. I think, and not just Waymo, we've talked a lot about them, but Arizona's been the recipient of trucks and small vehicles and deliveries and all different kinds of modes and methods. And so it was a real iterative process working with our legislature. I think some of the earliest legislation came out maybe about 2015, somewhere around there. And then we kept, as needed, there's a real willingness to not overcorrect on the innovation and allow it to have a little bit of time, with some expectation that we're all in the same game about safety, right? And not doing undue risk. But I know for our state and many others across the nation, there's a real interest in being able to work with technologists to understand the technology better and then be able to get that right blend and mix associated with what's happening. I will tell you one of the best things you can do, and I realize that so many of you are watching every dollar and cent around the technical aspects of it, but hosting petting zoo type scenarios with our policymakers. Every one of them likes a good picture for what's going on, and then combining that with some first responders that gets you that can breed a lot of goodwill and start to address many different. I'm sorry to sound so calculated about it, but in all candor, it allows greater visibility then for even tackling some of the issues or intentions around broader community and public engagement in this emerging technology.
Awesome. Thanks, Marisa. So by way of wrapping up, I think many folks like to draw simplistic parallels between AAM and the Jetsons, right? That show originally aired in 1962 in a fictional world based in 2062. And already they've gotten some things right. We have smartwatches. We have flat panel TVs. We have chatbots. We have dog treadmills. Yes, those exist. So sitting in 2025, we still have time, right? With 37 years to go, we don't yet have our flying cars, but with the energy and brains of this panel and all of you, I think there's a great chance of having an even better reality than fiction created. So thank you to Angela, Sarah, Professor Waas, and Marisa for an incredible panel wrapping up day 2, and we'll be done here.
And thank you, Taylor.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
Taylor.
Taylor, nice.
Yeah.